Good morning. Welcome to IILM Samvaad series, our multidisciplinary platform where we talk about everything power, everything policy and strategy. So today we are going to talk about the Indo-Pacific at Crossroads and India's maritime choices today. There are a lot of power transitions happening in the international world order, and in all these things, India's position is also changing. So it matters what India thinks about the Indo-Pacific today. India is no longer a peripheral actor. It has become a major power in the Indo-Pacific. How India reads this moment, how it balances autonomy with alignment, and how it translates its vision into a maritime strategy becomes important. And to help us unpack all these critical questions, we are privileged to be joined by Captain Sarabjeet Singh Parmar, a distinguished naval officer and a respected strategic thinker. He brings together operational naval experience and deep academic engagement. He is a distinguished fellow at the Council for Strategic and Defence Research, the Australia-India Institute, the Indo-Pacific Studies Centre, the Centre for Military History and Conflict Studies, and the United Service Institution of India. Sir, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome to IILM University. So we often hear that the rule-based international order is under strain, whether in the South China Sea, the Indian Ocean region, especially with Bay of Bengal, the Red Sea, and even the erosion of institutions like WTO and the United Nations Security Council. We also see in the Indo-Pacific the competing visions at play, China's assertion, non-traditional maritime security threats like piracy, and the regional actors navigating between different poles. So in your assessment, are we witnessing the end of a rule-based international order, or is it merely its reconfiguration into competing regional orders with the Indo-Pacific at the center?
You know, for that we must go back a couple of decades to 1945 when the so-called rules-based international order was created. And it was created post-World War II with the main aim of ensuring that no more conflicts took place. And I think we just take that with a pinch of salt. The setting up of the United Nations and a host of other institutions, some of which you have mentioned. The main threat was obviously the Soviet Union, and you had two major blocs during the Cold War times that spanned a number of decades. So you had the Western Alliance, the NATO, and you had the Soviet bloc that was headed by the Soviet Union. I think the first shock that the rules-based international order, not a shock per se, but the time to change, to evolve, to accept the new security environment was the collapse of the Soviet Union, in which we saw a gap before. Now we see that the Western alliances are looking at Russia as a threat and China as a growing challenge. Let's just keep China as a challenge and a risk. And so therefore, in between period was the time when the two super blocs actually sort of dissolved the interactions, and we saw the approach of multilateralism. And India, which was pegged with the Soviet Union for a number of reasons, looked at engaging many other nations. And today we look at multilateralism, we look at plurilateralism. But getting back to the question you asked about what is the state of the rules-based international order, there are three main challenges. And I think Chatham House in 2015 addressed this issue. The three main challenges to the rules-based international order were legitimacy, equity, and self-confidence. What do you understand by these terms? And I think when I explain them, it will become explanatory and opens the doors to understanding where the rules-based international order stands today. So legitimacy. Legitimacy is the acceptance and the support of the rules-based international order by the advocates and the very principles of the principal nations who set up that rules-based order. So that essentially is the Western alliances, the US and its allies. And of course, at that point in time, do remember when it was set up, we were still not independent. And today we see a number of nations whose voices were weak on the international table are now saying that you need to hear our voice, and India is one of them. So that's the legitimate part. Equity means that the advantages that come from the rules-based international order have to work for the majority, not the minority. But we see powerful nations often cross the line and do not follow the rules-based international order they set themselves, because for the simple reason they have the power to do so, and they have the ability to address any economic sanctions that come their way, but we haven't seen that happening. Self-confidence is that over a period of time, we have nations, as I said, who say that now you must hear my voice. There is a clamor for a reorganization of the United Nations Security Council. We see the whole UN being questioned as to the efficacy, and of course the attendant bodies that the UN has is being questioned. And today we're in a state of flux where the very principles and these founder nations are themselves questioning the rules-based international order. And what we see in the Indo-Pacific is something based on the evolution that is taking place. And the question that I often ask is, then what is the role of middle powers? So if the rules-based international is under stress, and I'm not going to go into the debate of whose rules and who will ensure that they are followed and why doesn't everybody follow them equally. So we are looking at a change in the rules-based international order, and it will take some time before the new environment settles down. And I think we give it some time.
Sir, thank you. So in this environment, India is also being increasingly described as, even by United States, as a net security provider in the Indo-Pacific. So the expectation from India is visible because India is also doing a lot of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief measures, like Sri Lankan floods, when Maldives had its drinking water issue, when the desalination plant collapsed. There are a lot of anti-piracy operations that India is leading in the Gulf of Aden, maritime domain awareness initiatives, and also India's growing naval engagements with the Western Indian Ocean. So amidst all this, do you think India is prepared strategically and also institutionally to accept these expectations from the world that comes from being viewed as a net security provider in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, I hate to rain on your parade, but I do not agree with this term net security provider. It's a term that was, again, used by the US, and it slowly entered the Indian lexicon and strategic thinking of net security provider. So in 2015, when we were revising the Indian Maritime Security, unclassified security document for the Navy, we tried to address this issue, and we realized that it's an impossible term to describe. How do you define it? What is it that is expected? What will India do to be a net security provider? So slowly over a period of time, we have adopted two new terms. One is preferred security partner, and the second one is first responder. These are doables, they can be explained, and it's something that we have been doing. So whatever you wanted to cover under the net security provider is something that we are covering under these two terms. And so let's go back again a couple of decades, when, let's say, let me go back to 1990. And of course, when we were looking at the whole new world out there and we were reaching out and we were engaging many nations, for many years we were considered an Indian Ocean region power. Around 2015 is when the term Indo-Pacific was gaining ascendancy, and we have managed to breach that sort of invisible boundary of the Indian Ocean region, and today we have stepped out into the Indo-Pacific. We are operating under the concept of Sagar, which is now Mahasagar. So how do we engage? So under Mahasagar, which is the umbrella term, if you'd like to put it that way, and it's a concept, remember, it's not a policy, but it's an approach and a concept, is that we look at our neighborhood first, which itself is under challenge today. We look at our Look West policy, we look at our Act East policy, we look at the Indian Pacific Oceans Initiative, which was initiated by India and started in 2018. We look at the Quad, we look at ASEAN centrality. So we are looking at building capacities and capabilities of nations around so that we follow the growth pattern and everybody grows together, which is beneficial. And there are three main pillars that need to be addressed when we do this. One is stability, one is security, and the third is peace. So in the broad Indo-Pacific, when we look at it, we are looking at enhancing stability, we are looking at ensuring security, and we are looking at preserving peace. We have also stated that we will do it alone if required, but it's an impossible task, and therefore we are cooperating and working with nations, whether they are in the IOR or in the broader Indo-Pacific, to ensure that these three pillars remain strong, and we all together approach the Indo-Pacific and what we call a free and open and inclusive Indo-Pacific.
Thank you, sir. So across the Indo-Pacific, we're also seeing a lot of grey zone maritime activities which are increasing, whether it's China's use of maritime militia, Coast Guard vessels, the undersea surveillance. But we also see that this traditional naval deterrence that we were using for decades, one centered on visible force, kinetic capability. Now it operates alongside information warfare, cyber resilience, and constant surveillance, especially at the onset of use of artificial intelligence in this platform. So, how are gray zone activities, cyber capabilities, all these reshaping the nature of deterrence at sea?
So when you talk about deterrence, it's again a very huge umbrella. Under the military concept of deterrence, there are two. One is strategic and one is conventional. So strategic obviously strays into the realm of nuclear, so we will leave that aside. But we look at our conventional power as the main deterrence. And against Pakistan, it has stood the test of time, you can say. With China, it's a different angle. We do have conventional deterrence, but we also are developing the strategic deterrence. And I often say this, that if we can threaten Beijing from the center of the Bay of Bengal, that would be a boost to our strategic deterrence. And that is something we are aiming for. And if you follow the news and you see the missile firings that we do in the Bay of Bengal, we are slowly progressing towards it. Apart from this deterrence, under the whole umbrella of national deterrence, you have economic deterrence. Your ability to withstand any economic strangleholds against the US. One example I can give you is the recent tariff issues. We are now engaging the US for talks about a deal. So you have economic deterrence, you have your military deterrence, and you also have the what is called the comprehensive national power. If that gets developed, then your whole deterrence, both in qualitative terms and quantitative terms, increases multifold. And that's something that we must look for. You spoke about cyber. That's again another big challenge, and therefore it's where technology comes in. What is our ability to ensure that we do not get cyber attacked? What is our ability to ensure that we have the capability to deter our adversaries from doing the same to us? And of course, there is the all famous two concepts of deterrence, deterrence by denial and deterrence by punishment. From the military terms, you can work your way into the economic and trade area. You can look at the cyber area, but these are issues that need to be looked at closely. And it's not that the militaries have to do it or you have individual agency. All of them, sum total, working together would be able to reach a level of high deterrence. And I think that's something we need in the manner in which we see the changing world, where we spoke about rules-based international order, but we are looking at relationships that are now based on transaction. It's a transactional-based world. And I'd like to introduce a term which I often talk about, is called a deals-based order. It exists. Those who are interested, you can carry out a study. There are a few papers written on it. So are we living in a world that actually has been a deals-based order from day one? And do we need to actually accept it and bring it out in the open?
So that's very interesting. And also in the context of when you just talked about this transactional relationship, about Quad. So it has largely evolved a lot from a consultative grouping to a strategic platform on cooperation on maritime security, supply chain, critical minerals, trade and all that. But today, Quad is also under a lot of challenge, especially regarding Trump's ambivalence towards multilateralism, his threat to pull away from Quad. So in this context, do you think Quad represents a durable strategic framework, or is it still in an experiment shaped by convenience rather than convergence?
Well, that's a loaded question. Let me be careful about it. So if you go back to 2004, during the tsunami, when the four Quad nations actually, sort of got together and worked together, there was no inkling that it will be called a Quad. The Japanese Prime Minister mentioned the confluence of the oceans when he spoke at our parliament here. And then, of course, many things happened en route, and Quad actually came about only a couple of years ago. It emerged with the concept of the Indo-Pacific, which was slowly being accepted. So what is a Quad? A Quad is a gathering of four nations. In this case, it's the US, India, Japan, and Australia. The Quad at some times was also referred as to a grouping of three allies and one strategic partner. That itself says a lot in the manner in which Quad was looked at. Is the Quad a military combine? Definitely no. I would disagree with it. The difference between the Quad and many other groupings that came about was Quad has been seen as leader-led. So we've had a lot of actions or decisions that were taken at the Leaders Summit that has trickled down. Some is work in progress, some has stalled a little, and some need to be pushed. The absence of or the inability of the leaders to get together, which was planned to be in India last year, due to the difference between India and the US, says a lot, because the Indo-Pacific and especially the three other Quad nations are not sure in which direction the US will push. So when you look at the national security strategy and the national defense strategy of the US that came out in December last year and January this year, there is an indication about how the US looks at the Indo-Pacific, and I'll cover two of them. One is that it will not permit any adversary. No nation has been named, but of course, we can always take a best guess that it will be China first and maybe Russia a distant second, to prevent any adversary from gaining a position of dominance. That's one. The second is to retain the Indo-Pacific defense posture. And it can be argued that all the happenings or the occurrences or events or the cooperative mechanisms and collaboration that take place the world over and the Indo-Pacific is due to the security blanket that has been provided by the Western alliances or the US-backed alliances and the strategic partnerships, more so in the Indo-Pacific. So therefore, if the Quad presently is under question, rightfully so. And I think if the moment we have a leaders summit, there will be clarity on which direction the Quad is headed. In the meantime, again, I've mentioned it and I'll mention it again. What is the role of middle powers? So if Russia, India, Australia and Japan can work together and have a sort of modicum of support from the US through the enunciation of its NSS and NDS, Quad is not finished. There's a lot of work to do. And do remember, the US President himself has supported Quad in his earlier administration. I don't think that's going to die, because for the US, the Indo-Pacific is important, and the US also knows that it cannot do it alone without the cooperation going on. So Quad is not dead. I think we need to give it time and see where the road takes it.
Thank you, sir. So my last question. So in this times of great power rivalry and rise of middle powers, just as you quoted, in one sentence, what core principles should guide India's maritime policy in this decade of global uncertainty?
Engage everybody and anybody. Place your national interest the foremost. Look at the interests of other nations. For that, you need to understand what is the strategic horizon or vision of the other nations. Work towards collaboration and cooperation based on that convergence which we see, and then do support the pillars of stability, security and peace. And I think that is the way forward.
Sir, thank you so much. So on behalf of IILM University, my faculty, students and staff, I thank you so much for your presence here today and for talking to us about a very timely conversation, India's maritime choices today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.